notes on the reading.
That's funny.
Hey, they're probably studying for APEC. We should go join them.
Good idea.
Oh my gosh, you guys were so right. It's so much better to study in the sun. I don't remember anything about the Russo-Japanese War though. I hope it's not on the recap.
Don't worry about it. I took so many notes on that.
The Russo-Japanese War was fought from 1904 to 1905 between the Russian Empire and the Empire of Japan over rival imperial ambitions in Manchuria and Korea. Russia sought a warm water port on the Pacific Ocean for its navy and for maritime trade. The Japanese government perceived Russia as a threat to its plans for expansion into Asia and chose to go to war. After negotiations broke down in 1904, the Japanese Navy opened hostilities by attacking the Russian Eastern Fleet at Port Arthur, China. Russia suffered multiple defeats by Japan, but Tsar Nicholas II was convinced that Russia would win and chose to remain engaged in the war, at first to await the outcomes of certain naval battles, and later to preserve the dignity of Russia by averting a humiliating peace. Russia ignored Japan's willingness early on to agree to an armistice and rejected the idea to bring the dispute to the arbitration court at The Hague. The war concluded with the Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. The complete victory of the Japanese military surprised world observers.
Oh my gosh, thanks! I get it now.
I got that, but the one I didn't understand was the revolution in 1905.
The Russian Revolution of 1905 was a wave of mass political and social unrest that spread through vast areas of the Russian Empire. It included worker strikes, peasant unrest, and military mutinies. It led to constitutional reform, namely the October Manifesto, including the establishment of the State Duma, the multi-party system, and the Russian Constitution of 1906. It was spurred by the Russian defeat in the Russo-Japanese War. There was also a growing realization of the need for reform after politicians had failed to do so. While the Tsar managed to keep his rule during the 1905 revolution, the event set the stage for the 1917 Russian Revolution.
My favorite topics were the March 1917 Revolution and Bloody Sunday.
Was that the one with Stalin?
No.
Bloody Sunday took place on January 22, 1905. A Russian Orthodox priest loyal to Tsar Nicholas II, Father Gregory Gapon, led a mass procession of workers carrying pictures of the Tsar and a petition to present him at his imperial palace in St. Petersburg, Russia. Gregory Gapon was hoping to present the workers' request for reforms that would improve working conditions and hours through a peaceful demonstration. However, Tsar Nicholas II was not in the city. The chief of security police, Nicholas's uncle, Vladimir Lenin, tried to stop the march by ordering his police to fire upon the demonstrators. Over 100 marchers were killed and several hundred were injured. This violent approach to a peaceful protest marked the beginning of the violent phase of the Russian Revolution of 1905. Long-term causes of the March 1917 revolution were growing tensions and national debt due to Russia's involvement in World War I. Short-term causes were Russia raising the prices of bread for women who already worked long hours.
At the beginning of March in 1917, the government had introduced bread rationing in the city after the price of bread skyrocketed. Many of the women who bought this bread were factory workers that put in long hours. On March 8th, National Women's Day, about 10,000 women marched through Petrograd shouting, "Prison bread," and "Down with autocracy." Soon these women were joined by other workers. Tsar Nicholas ordered his military commanders to have their soldiers disperse the crowds, shooting them if necessary. However, significant numbers of soldiers joined the protesters, and the situation was out of Tsar Nicholas's control.
What other important events are we missing?
The November 1917 Revolution, the Russian Civil War, and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, obviously.
The Bolsheviks were falsely accused of trying to overthrow the provisional government. Their leader, Vladimir Lenin, was forced to flee to Finland. Alexander Kerensky, who was the prime minister in the provisional government, released the Bolsheviks from prison when General Lavur Kornilov tried to seize power. This action strengthened the Soviet and showed them how weak the provisional government was. Lenin joined with Leon Trotsky, who was a revolutionary and the chairman of the Petrograd Soviet. On November 6th, the pro-Soviet and pro-Bolshevik forces took control of Petrograd. The provisional government collapsed quickly. The new Soviet government was called the Council of People's Commissars, and it was led by Lenin. During Lenin's rule, he realized that he must quickly win the support of his people. He decided to gain peasant support by declaring the land nationalized. The Bolshevik regime also established social welfare reforms and gave women more rights. Lenin had also promised peace, and he established this by signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. This treaty decreed that the new communist government had to give up eastern Poland, Ukraine, Finland, and the Baltic provinces. During this time, Ukraine especially was home to many pogroms, which were organized massacres of Jews. Long-term causes of the November 1917 revolution included problems with the provisional government. When the Petrograd Soviet issued the Army Order No. 1, the army dissolved into chaos. Masses of unhappy peasants left the army and began to seize their land back. Short-term causes of the November 1917 revolution included when the Bolsheviks were falsely accused of trying to overthrow the provisional government and when the Bolsheviks were released from prison. The new Bolshevik government faced oppression from groups loyal to the Tsar, the bourgeois and aristocratic liberals, and anti-Leninist socialists such as the Mensheviks and the Socialist Revolutionaries. This conflict soon grew into a Russian civil war. The war was fought between the Bolshevik or Red Army and the anti-Bolshevik or White Army. The major white forces were defeated and the Bolshevik regime prevailed. The royal family was a victim of the civil war. Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Tsarina Alexandra, and their 5 children were murdered by the local Soviet. The communists began a practice called war communism, which included the nationalization of banks and industries, the acquisition of grain from peasants, and the centralization of government in order to ensure a constant stream of supplies for the Red Army. They also used an instrument called revolutionary terror. This established a new Red secret police known as the Cheka. It aimed to destroy all opposition to the communist regime. Short-term causes of the March 1917 revolution included peasant dissatisfaction, strikes, and the skyrocketing price of bread. The March 1917 revolution happened because of long-term causes such as World War I challenging the Tsarist government and the middle class hoping for a constitutional government but never getting one.
On March 3, 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was signed between Russia and Germany, ending Russia's involvement in World War I. With this treaty, the Triple Entente lost an ally on the Eastern Front. Russia had to give up the territories of Ukraine, Finland, Poland, and the Baltic provinces. Vladimir Lenin, to counteract critics, insisted that the loss of Russian territory was insignificant to the big picture of the spreading of the socialist revolution. The short-term causes were the Bolsheviks wanting to get out of the war, and the long-term causes was Russia getting beat up by Germany.
Who was one of the most important figures of the Russian Revolution?
Probably Lenin. He was the head of the government of Soviet Russia after Tsar Nicholas II was abdicated because of his rule being influenced by Grigory Rasputin and unsuccessful economic policies.
Yeah, the new Soviet government ended Russian involvement in World War I with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk.
Oh yeah, after the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II, the use of serfs was replaced by the ideology of Marxist communism.
Oh, and don't forget that after his death, there was a power struggle among Trotsky and Stalin as to who would replace the late leader.
Well, I definitely feel ready for the recap now.
For sure.